in India. We shall be talking about that today, and also the role that Surat had to play in that entire scheme of events. So I want this to be an interactive session. I shall be asking questions, and I would expect responses from you too. And a few of you, if there are no bandwidth issues, I would request a few of you to switch on your cameras too, so that I can at least have the semblance of looking at somebody while I'm talking. I can see Seema ma'am, I can see Saloni.
It's
Uh,
always better to talk to live people rather than the tag or the names.
Absolutely, absolutely. But the difficult time that we are in, no option but to resort to something like this. So let's start the talk for today. Uh, I'll take you back to mid 19th century Surat, sometime in the 1800s, and let's try to imagine what Surat would have looked like at that point of time. You had started with an imagination exercise the last time for 17th century Surat, but this time it's easier because Surat, if you look at the old parts of the city, has not changed much over the past 100 years. Even today, you will find a lot of old buildings. The layout of the city remains more or less the same, but unfortunately, we are losing that as the day passes. With every passing day, we are losing all those old buildings. But even then, the area around Chowk, Bhagar, Rajmarg, which connects Chowk to the station, Begumpura, Haripura, Gopipura, Nanpura, the old fort wall. So all these areas in the layout remain more or less the same. Uh, it was less crowded. There were fewer people. There were fewer vehicles, and that's the kind of city that I would love to stay in. Interestingly, a very senior officer of the government of India, who was also a Padma Shri, we were having a chat one day, and she said if half the population of Surat, half the population of India could be wiped out, then the country would look many times more beautiful. And in my mind, I was saying, okay, Thanos, here, please calm down. But so if you want to imagine how Surat would have looked at that point of time, just erase half the population of the city and you will have a good idea of what the city would have looked. So Surat, as we all know, has basically been a mercantile city, a city of businesses, a city of traders, merchants. And if there are any businessmen in the in the group today, I would love to have an answer from them. Prakash, uh, can I pose this question to you?
Hi, Paritosh.
Hello, hello, Prakash. Thanks for joining. And as a business person, when you go out to vote, what are your expectations from the government?
Stability of the business city, I mean, stability in the city is important for me as a voter,
Right.
and good infrastructure to do business with is another requirement
True.
for a trader.
Right. So the traders of Surat have also had the same set of expectations. They want stability, they want law and order, they want minimum interference from the government in their businesses, they want easier tax policies, lesser tariffs, but at the same time, they want a dispute resolution, they want the government to act as a regulator, as a facilitator, as a logistics provider. These have been the simple demands of the traders of Surat since medieval times, during the Mughal times, and then as Surat became a part of the the rule of the Nawabs, the Siddhi Nawab, and finally, when the British took over in 1800, even thereafter the demands were the same. When they were met, the people were very happy, but when they were not met, they revolted. And during the Mughal period, it was difficult because any sort of revolt would have unfortunately resulted in something a little more drastic. But under the British rule, they gave them some window as far as democratic rights are concerned, so that they could revolt, or at least they could make a representation. So all the modern movements that have happened in Surat over the last 100 years of British rule, they were all mercantile in nature necessarily. They were all centered around some taxation policy or some price rise or some license fee. So we shall be discussing a few of them, which are landmark events in the history of the city. And the first one to happen was the 1799 petticoat upsurge. Now, what's a petticoat? A petticoat is a female dress. I mean, that's a piece of clothing that women usually wear. So, why is a revolt called a petticoat upsurge? So the situation is it's 1799. The Surat is still under the Nawab's rule, and the British government exercises financial control over the city, and they have raised the prices on food grains and tobacco. And in response to this, some 500 Muslim women, all clad in burqas, they storm the office of the commissioner, and they catch hold of the bakshi of the Nawab, and until the decision is reversed, they refuse to budge from that place. So that is the first popular revolt that Surat has seen against price rise, and surprisingly led by Muslim women. And next we come to the 1810 revolt by Imam Mahdi. That's not a very important revolt because he was an upstart. I mean, he was warmongering, he was cantankerous to an extent. So he went about revolting, but that did not receive much public support. Then we come to 1844. Now, if somebody in the okay, Seema, ma'am, I would like to ask you, what is the salt movement that you know, the anti-salt tax movement that you are aware of?
Sorry, sir.
The British had imposed salt tax.
Yeah.
So, what movement is that called? What do we call it? By what name do we call it? If anybody else in the audience would like to respond.
Namak Satyagraha.
Namak Satyagraha. What year was that?
Sorry, sir.
वो कौन से वर्ष में था? So that was in 1930. Yeah. Please, Saloni. Sorry. Okay, is that Chandani answering?
Yeah, but you already answered it. So
okay, so I'll ask you a follow-up question to that. Who was the leader of that?
Of course, everybody knows that. The Salt Satyagraha was led by Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi.
Correct, but is there any other Salt Satyagraha that you are aware of?
I'm not really aware of any other one, but yeah, I'm sure that there are postulates that suggest that there were many.
All right, so thank you, Chandni. So there were many Salt Satyagrahas which followed Gandhiji, what Gandhiji did in Dandi. There was one at Dharasana. There were a few in Tamil Nadu. There was one in Kerala also. One in Odisha. Then people from Assam walked all the way and reached Bangladesh, and there was a Salt Satyagraha there too. So across the country there were Salt Satyagrahas. But the first recorded instance of a Salt Satyagraha happens 86 years before Gandhiji's Dandi March, in the year 1844 in Surat. So taking inspiration from that, maybe 86 years down the line, Gandhiji organizes his Salt Satyagraha. So let us look a little at the background of what happened in the year 1844. The British at that time, the taxation on salt was 8 annas per month, amount that we call. And the British raised it from 8 annas to 1 rupee overnight. And the people revolted. So how did they revolt? A crowd of almost 5,000 people assembled at Bhagar. Now, even today, I mean, the last time I think a large crowd assembled at Bhagar was in 2011, when the country had won the World Cup. That was the largest crowd that we have seen in a long time at that place. So, but imagine in 1844, 5,000 people gathering at Bhagar and sloganeering against the government. And all the shops in Nanpura, the shops in the Chowk area, the Chowk Bazaar, they were all closed because people were boycotting. And bricks were thrown at British commissioners, stones were thrown, people got all their domestic waste, what we call etwad in Gujarati. So they got all their domestic waste and they started throwing them at the British commissioners, the military officers. From the windows, they were throwing it on them. And the military had to be invited to intervene. A few people were bayoneted, but fortunately nobody died. And so it was a period of a lot of commotion. And what happened as a result of it? from the 1 rupee increase from the which they had imposed, they brought it down to 12 annas. So this is a successful example of a revolt happening in the year 1844. And then we come to 1848, which is a Weights and Measures Act. Now, what are weights and measures? We all use them in business, particularly the Kirana wala uses it more. So Gujarat had its own Gujarati set of weights and measures, but the British wanted to standardize it across the country, which, in my opinion, is a fair and a reasonable step. And so, but unfortunately, what they did was that they took the Bengali weights and measures and imposed it across the country. And the Gujarati traders, they went up in rebellion, and they got it reversed back to what was there before the Weights and Measures Act was announced. Again, the shops were closed. All the traders, the Mahajans, they refused to sell anything to any British officer, or for that matter, any European in the city of Surat. And shops were closed, but all the poor people in the city of Surat who could not afford to stay without a day's meal, they were given food grains free of cost on credit without interest. So Surat has always been a magnanimous city and a city of philanthropists. So even in those days, we have examples of that. That was the year 1848. Then what happens after 1848? What year we come to? That is 1857. What happens in 1857? We see the first War of Independence. Now, today, interestingly, the 27th of September is a landmark date as far as the 1857 War of Independence is concerned. Can anyone please guess why today is so important? Any guesses? I think.
Because
Yeah,
yesterday was your birthday, Paritosh.
No, I hope I'm not a reincarnation of somebody who died in 1857. But the reason is,
May I?
yeah, Charlie, please.
Uh, I don't know the reason behind or things like that, but I do remember that my friends from JNU told me about Siege of Lucknow. So that's the only thing I remember that happened on 27th of November, because one of my friend happens to have her birthday today. So if I think the Siege of Lucknow.
I think the Siege of Lucknow was a little later. But today, the 27th of September, is significant because on this day, the British, the Mughal Emperor, who was the last Mughal Emperor?
Bahadur Shah Zafar.
Bahadur Shah Zafar. Very good,
Yeah.
Rishabh. So Bahadur Shah Zafar, after he was dethroned, because the city of Delhi was sieged by the British sometime in early September, and the Mughal Nawab, he had taken refuge in Humayun's tomb along with his family and two of his sons. So on the 27th of September, the Mughal Emperor Bahadur Shah Zafar, along with his wife Zeenat Mahal, was imprisoned, dethroned. Two of his sons, they were taken to another monument which is known as Khuni Darwaza, where they were shot to death, and then he was deposed to Rangoon, which is in Burma, Myanmar. So today is the day which officially marks the end of Mughal rule in India in the year 1857. So coming to the events of 1857, we saw eruptions across the country. So I would be very happy if each one of you could name one leader from the 1857 revolt that you remember or that has inspired you. Calling it a revolt of 1857 is incorrect, because that is the terminology which the British had imposed. It would be prudent to call it the first War of Independence, as many other authors have thereafter called it. But do you remember who was the first person to call it the first War of Independence?
V.D. Savarkar?
No, it wasn't Savarkar. That is the popular perception. Everybody thinks that it was Veer Savarkar who called it the first War of Independence. He definitely popularized the term. But it was Kavi Narmad from Surat who first used Pratham Swatantra Sangram. That was the first War of Independence for the very first time. And then Savarkar, some another 40-50 years later, popularized the term. So let me just take a detour and talk a little about Narmad before we get to the War of 1857. Kavi Narmad is known as the father of modern Gujarati literature. And what was his contribution to awakening national awareness and national consciousness in the people of Surat through his poems, through his works, texts? Now, he coined the term Deshabhiman. The word Deshabhiman translates loosely to patriotism. So he brought nationalistic literature to Gujarat, and he was the first person, despite being a Gujarati, despite being a very popular Gujarati writer, he advocated the use of Hindi and the Devanagari script as a national language. And he was the first person to call the 1857 War of Independence as the first War of Independence. So now, starting with you, Vanshika, just name some leader from the 1857 revolt that you appreciate or you admire.
So I mean, obviously, Rani Ki Jhansi, as everybody knows,
Right.
that first comes to mind first. But then also a lot of provincial leaders that a lot of people otherwise aren't aware of. So, for example, I mean, there was Kunwar Singh, and
Kamar Singh from Jagdishpur, yes.
yeah, and then there was from UP, Bihar, and multiple places. But
Right. Can you name anyone from Gujarat?
From Gujarat, no. So actually, Gujarat is one place that I don't know any leader from during the 1857 period.
Okay, Rishabh, can we get one name from you? What's the leader that you admire?
Tatya Tope.
Tatya Tope, okay. And do you know where he had hidden after he was being chased by the British?
It was like some forest in central India or something, right? Or he fled to Kathmandu, I think.
No, Kathmandu was Nana Sahib Peshwa. Tatya Tope had come to these Bhil forests around Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and he also briefly come to Surat, but that was just a small tour that he had taken. But eventually he was captured here and then he was hanged to death. Then any other leaders? Saloni, whom do you admire?
I don't know why I just thought of Mangal Pandey and Amir Khan.
And Mangal Pandey is significant because it was his action that started the entire chain of events that led to the revolt of 1857. Although again, that has also been distorted a little because even before the mutiny that happened at Barakpur, there were mutinies that had happened in Meerut. So, but again, Mangal Pandey is popularly considered the first martyr of India's war for independence, India's struggle for independence. Okay, so moving on, can you name any one person from Gujarat or from Surat that you know of who has contributed to India's freedom struggle in the year 1857, in the events of 1857?
You give a hint?
I cannot give a hint because we do not know them, unfortunately. That portion of our history has been erased. And also, yeah, Vanshika, please.
Just like based on popular knowledge or at least mainstream, according to mainstream accounts, Gujarat is not usually talked about or covered.
1857 came.
Right, phase.
Right.
So I mean, you have the northern belt and then you have parts of eastern India, but southern and western India are really not that active unless they are in. It's generally not known, and you could share with us.
We have a name from Seema ma'am, Jodha
Manek from Dwarka. Yes. Jodha Manek was a provincial leader. He had also contributed. But yes, Vanshika, you are right. Why was Gujarat not in the forefront of the entire movement? There are a few examples. There are a few reasons for that. The first is that Gujarat was never a principality. So there were small principalities, but otherwise it was either under under the rule of the Mughals, or later it had passed into the large parts of Gujarat were under the Gayakwad. And the Gayakwads were loyal to the British. So, and all these smaller principalities which bordered the Gayakwad frontiers, they were not willing or they were not courageous enough to rise against the combined forces of the British and the Gayakwad. So that was one strong reason. At the same time, if you see, most of these revolts have been provided leadership either by kings or by local zamindars or by feudal lords, as we know them, the polygars in southern India. So this perception that southern India was not as active is incorrect, because southern India was also equally active as far as the 1857 revolt is concerned. But unfortunately, people in the north don't read as much about the history of the south. We restrict ourselves only to what happened in the northern part of the country. But Gujarat, yes, was not very active because we did not have as many feudal lords. We had trader guilds, we had merchants, we had independent small marginal farmers, but we did not have so many feudal lords as such. And all those that were, they had already declared their allegiance to the Gaekwads. And the intellectuals of Surat, some of them were in favor of British rule because the British rule was bringing in some newer ideas of liberty, equality, scientific education, modernity, rationalism to Indian thinking. But again, that is a topic of debate. How much did the British contribute to Indian education, which even 1,000 years before their arrival was superlative? So not many intellectuals supported the idea, but still there were a few brave people, particularly from Surat, since we are discussing Surat's history, who did contribute to the revolt of 1857. Let us see a few of them. The first, they are Saint Nirmal Das and Ramkishan. They were saints in Surat, and they rallied the Hindu population to revolt against the British. Then you have Maulvi Liaquat. You must have heard of Maulvi Ahmadullah. Maulvi Ahmadullah, but not many people have heard of Maulvi Liaquat Ali. Now, Liaquat Ali was from Allahabad. He had spearheaded the movement there. And once the movement in Allahabad was crushed, he escaped and came to Surat. Can you tell me the location of the central jail in Surat?
Sub-jail?
No, not the sub-jail. There is a central jail which is on the outskirts of Surat near Sachin. That place is called Lajpur. Lajpur jail. I mean, that is considered one of the ideal prisons in India. Although I think that's a little oxymoronish to call it an ideal prison. What is an ideal prison? No idea. But again, Lajpur is the location of the central jail, and that used to be under the Nawab's territory at that point of time. So Maulvi Liaquat came to Lajpur and he took refuge there, and he was hiding in Surat. One day, poor fellow, he saw the Nawab arriving late for the namaz. So a devout Muslim is supposed to offer namaz 5 times a day at a particular interval, following a timetable. So the Nawab was not very particular. He used to come late, and so this fellow chided him. He said, "Nawab साहब थोड़ा समय का भी ध्यान रखिए, थोड़ा इसको भी तवज्जो दीजिए." So the Nawab got a little offended, and the very next moment he informed the British that this chap is hiding in my palace, imprison him. And Maulvi Liaquat was taken to Andaman, and he spent the rest of his life in Kalapani. All because he told the Nawab to offer namaz at the right time. Then we had poet Harilal. Now, poet Harilal used to write poems which were nationalistic in nature. So he was also imprisoned. Then, interestingly, we had a British professor. He was called Professor Green, who used to teach in Surat. He had retired, but he had continued to stay in Surat. He was a British citizen. And he was asked, he had supported the Indian demands for independence. And so thereafter, when Professor Green, he supported their ideas. He said these people need to have representative government. There should be liberty. They should be treated equally. So they started treason against him. So Deshdroh, as we call. And then he was excommunicated from his church. He was made an outcast. And he was writing under the pseudonym Indo Fields, and he was tortured to such an extent. Okay, Chandni, Gujarat was not a sovereign state. So what argument are we talking about?
I think she sent that long time ago, Paritosh.
All right.
Yeah, trivial. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So we were talking about John Field. So he was mentally tortured to such an extent that poor thing died of depression and mental ailment. and she is also being considered as a martyr who fought for India's independence. So that is 1857. In 1860, we had an anti-income tax act, and in 1878 we had anti-license tax. So these are some of the events that happened till the year 1885. What happened in the year 1885? Why is 1885 significant? That is the year when the Indian National Congress was formed. Who started the Indian National Congress? Who is considered to be the founder?
Yeah, this guy,
Octavian.
what's his name?
Alan Octavian Hume.
Yeah,
He
yeah,
was an Irish guy,
yeah.
and he got all these people together, the intellectuals, the middle class intellectuals of that period together, and started this organization. Now, there are different theories about the origin of the Congress. Some people say that it was a safety valve because the anger that the Indians had against the British rule in India had to be channelized. It needed some output, some outburst. So that happened in the form of the Congress. And the Congress, when it started, was a very soft, a very moderate organization. What were the demands? The demands were to increase the franchise, allow Indian people to vote, and bring down the tariffs, and give them a greater say in the economic policies, and give greater representation in the central legislature, in the provincial legislatures, and the local self-government. So these were some very simple demands. And what was their MO? What was their modus operandi? How would they put forward their demands? Through representation, through petitions, and through letters that they would write to the governor general or the viceroy thereafter. So this was their MO. But in 1882, that is 3 years before the Congress was formed, an organization was formed in Gujarat, in Surat, which was called the Praja Hitvardhak Sabha. Now, this was formed by Harilal Dhruv. The Praja Hitvardhak Sabha, formed by Harilal Dhruv. Harilal Dhruv, a very talented man. Just go and check out his Wikipedia page today. He was responsible for ensuring that elections in local bodies in Surat, Indians were allowed. The franchisee for people who owned property beyond 20,000 rupees was allowed. And the withdrawal of fine on all the rioters happened because of Harilal Dhruv. He was an Orientalist. He started as a lawyer but became an Orientalist and Sanskrit scholar. And thereafter, he also participated in the Royal Asiatic Society and the International Conference of Orientalists. A very, very talented man, and also a freedom fighter at heart. So this is one stream of moderates that was working. Now there was another stream of freedom fighters who were called extremists, because in their view they were a little more extreme than the moderates. Although I again don't agree with that nomenclature. It's unfair to call somebody an extremist. Who do you call an extremist today? So it would be wrong to call a freedom fighter by that terminology. So, but come up with a few names. We have the trilogy. Can somebody please come in and give me a few names?
Lala Lajpat Rai.
Very good.
Lal
Lal Bal Pal.
yeah.
Lala Lajpat Rai, Bal Gangadhar Tilak,
Gangadhar Tilak.
and
Bipin
Bipin
Chandra.
Chandra Pal.
Bichin Chandra Pal.
So these were three provincial leaders: Punjab, Maharashtra, and Bengal. So these three places became the hotspots of revolutionary activity in the country. Now, what were their demands? How were they different from the moderate Congress?
They kind of felt that the three P's approach of prayer, petition, and I don't recall what the third P is, but that basically that was a soft approach of the Congress that wasn't working, and they felt that the movement had to kind of take shape from outside, like parliamentary spaces, and like just political representation was not going to be enough, and therefore that.
So what
and
was
that
their
then,
alternative? Their alternative was it
they
should be a mass movement,
yeah.
and you should move towards Swadeshi
Mm-hmm.
and boycott all British goods, boycott all their offices, boycott all the positions that the Britishers are offering you, and boycott British education and set up national schools of education, national universities. And but also very definitive difference also lies in the goal that they had taken up for India's independence. Yeah, okay, right, Prakash, you just mentioned that what I was about to say. The goal of the moderates was to have a dominion status under the British. But the extremists, what did they demand? They demanded Purna Swaraj. They demanded Swaraj or independence from the British. So that is, their goals were different, their methods were different, and they wanted to move the movement from the confines of a middle class intellectuals to a more broad-based mass movement, which includes peasants, which includes workers, which also includes all the sections of the society. And what was the trigger that made them push for Swaraj? What event?
Ganesh Chaturthi.
No, I mean that happened later. That was their method. But there was one event which convinced them that what their method is correct, and they should push for a nationwide movement.
Yeah, the partition of
The partition of Bengal. Very good. And who was the viceroy then?
Curzon.
Lord Curzon. So Lord Curzon's partition of Bengal in the year 1905, that paved way for a nationwide movement in favor of the extremists. So in 1906, so the Congress organizes its sessions annually in December at different cities across the country. And they also had a policy of not appointing a person from that region as the president of that session. All right, so the 1906 session was held in Calcutta soon after the partition of Bengal. And there they had adopted all these goals that there should be Swaraj, there should be boycott, Swadeshi, national education. All these goals were adopted to pacify the extremists. And Dadabhai Naoroji was the president then, the grand old man of India, and he ensured that the moderates and extremists could sit at a table and they could discuss their issues. But what happens thereafter, the next year, is a landmark moment, not just in India's history or in the history of the Congress party, but also in the history of our city. The year is 1907, and the event is the annual session of the Congress, which is held in Surat. So in 1907, when they first decided the venue, it was decided to be Nagpur. They wanted to organize the session in Nagpur. But then they realized that since Nagpur is in Maharashtra, and the Maharashtrians were strict extremists, they were huge supporters of Lokmanya Tilak. So they said that the moderates felt that the extremists would hijack the Nagpur session and have their agenda passed as the Congress agenda. So instead, they a month prior to the session, the All India Congress Committee met, which did not have representation from the extremists. The moderates came together and they decided to shift the venue from Nagpur to Surat, because Surat at that time was considered a bastion of the moderates. And even today, if you talk to somebody, they would consider Gujaratis to be all moderate people. They talk sweetly, they maintain relations with everybody, they do not like fighting. But so moderates had their stronghold in Surat, and the session was shifted to Surat. Now, the president is to be elected. Look at the chain of events, it's very interesting. The president of the session is to be elected. So they set a date for the 24th of November, that on 24th of November, we'll have this election for the president of the Congress session. And on the 23rd of November, they sent an invitation to the extremist members to come and participate in the election. Now, how can you manage to travel to Surat from Maharashtra, Bengal, and Punjab or Tamil Nadu in a day's time? So the election was held without the presence of the extremists, and Raj Bihari Ghosh was declared the president of the session. Now, this session happens on the 25th, 26th, and 27th of December. And can you guess the venue for that in Surat? Just think of large open places around the old city or surrounding it. Maybe public spaces, gardens, anything.
Is that the Gopi Talab we have now?
No, not the Gopi Talab.
A garden, one of the garden.
It is one of the
Gandhi
gardens.
Bagh?
Victoria Garden.
No, it's not.
Victoria,
It's not Gandhi Bagh. Gandhi Bagh had a public meeting by Gandhiji, so that is how it came to be called Gandhi Bagh. But this particular thing happened somewhere else, some other garden, very famous garden.
Dutch Garden.
No, the Dutch garden is too small. I'll tell you the number of delegates. There were 1,600 people attending the Congress session, which later became 2,100. So Dutch garden cannot accommodate so many people. So what place could it be?
Vanita Vishram, no, right?
No, not Vanita. It's a garden. Today it's a
Yeah.
garden.
Okay.
You're forgetting the most famous garden that we have in the city.
Rangupuan.
No, not
No.
Rangupa.
Okay.
I am so unhappy with you people. It's Chopati.
Oh.
So we have heard of Dutch factories in Surat, Portuguese factories, British factories, but the French also had a factory in Surat. Now, can you tell me, what were they manufacturing in those factories?
Cotton, like cloth based material.
Okay, any other answers?
Prakash sir is saying nothing, and I also say nothing. They weren't producing anything, right?
Perfect. So they were traders. When they started out, they were traders. They were not manufacturers. And so all they used to do is get the goods from the hinterland, ship it to England, get it from England, ship it to the hinterland. That is what they were doing. And Surat was a port. But the officers who were engaged in this entire exercise of trade, they were called factors. And that led its name to their setup, which was called the factory. So basically, it was just a go down with a few offices.
कोठी कहता था ना
हाँ, कोठी. So in English it was
go down है.
So it was a go down, and it had offices for a few of their people, and the residences were elsewhere. And so there was also a French factory at one point of time. All right, so the French had 4 different locations in Surat under their occupation. One was in Suwali, because a lot of ships used to anchor at Suwali. I think Saloni had spoken about Suwali the last time. So Suwali was there. Then there was one area close to the Nawab's palace in Begumpura. Then they had a factory somewhere close to where the Dutch garden is. And they also had a garden, a large garden for their people. They used to grow champa trees in it. They used to grow grapes and then make wine out of it. Then they had gotten all exotic plants from France, roses, irises, and then they used to use it for vegetable farming. So that place was called the French Garden. And even today, if how many of you have seen Mysore Cafe? Most of you must have. So all the bungalows that are there behind Mysore Cafe or Priya Restaurant, or the place where Dheeraj Sons is right now. So that entire area used to be the French Garden, and even today that area is called French Garden. So Chowpatty used to be the French Garden, and the venue for the 1907 Congress session was Chowpatty. So large shamianas were built. There was a Jain gentleman who gave a loan of 1 lakh rupees for organizing that event. And so tents were set up, large halls, chairs were put up. So just imagine an election rally of today. So there is a stage, then you have almost 2,000 people seated there, and a beautiful, wonderful sight. But it is about to get nasty now. So on the 26th of December, that was the day when the session was first held. Surendranath Banerjee was a very senior Congress politician and freedom fighter. So he came forward to lay a proposal to elect Ras Bihari Ghosh as the president of that session. But as soon as he rose to give his speech, the extremists started shouting, "Kabhi nahi, never, we are never going to have Ras Bihari Ghosh as the president." And so to talk to people, to try to pacify them, Surendranath Banerjee stands up on his table and tries to pacify everybody. He has a very booming voice, a very masculine voice, but it all gets drained out. And on the other hand, Ras Bihari Ghosh is on the platform, on the stage, and he's shouting. He has a very shrill voice. He's obviously irritated because nobody is listening to him. And then you have Mr. Marvi, who is the head of the reception committee. He has a bell in his hand and he's constantly ringing that bell. And a lot of commotion there. And so nothing gets passed. And then it is postponed to the next day. It's adjourned to meet on the next day. On the 27th of December, they meet again. And this time again, Surendranath Banerjee gets on his table, passes a resolution to elect Ras Bihari Ghosh as the president. Ras Bihari Ghosh assumes his position, but then Lokmanya Tilak rises from the ranks of the extremists and tries to walk towards the platform. But then all these moderates, they've made a human chain. They are not allowing Lokmanya Tilak to pass. So he tries to push them. One or two of his extremist supporters push them aside. And finally, he reaches the platform, gets on the platform, and he says, I move an adjournment motion to adjourn the election of the president. But then the moderates start shouting, "This is an insult to a Bengali. We will not tolerate an insult to a Bengali. Two Bengalis are being insulted." And then somebody picks up a chair and tries to hit Lokmanya Tilak. And Gopal Krishna Gokhale comes to his defense. And seeing this, the Marathas, all the Maharashtrians, they get infuriated and they start shouting, "How the hell are you trying to hit our leader Lokmanya Tilak?" And then one very adventurous Maratha, he picks out his mojadi, his shoe, and then throws it in the air, and it lands on Surendranath Banerjee's cheek. And poor old fellow, he gets hit hard, and after hitting him, it flies and falls on Firoz Shah Mehta. And by that time, all the Marathas have got their sticks, and they start hitting all the moderates out of the venue. So within 15 minutes, the entire Congress session is free of moderates. There are only the extremists are left, and Lokmanya Tilak talks to them. The entire Shamiana is torn down. Chairs and tables are flung across the place. So it is very. I mean, we have this tradition of doing this. So what we are seeing in the parliament these days is not new. It's been happening for quite some time. And so this is how the Surat session happens. The Congress party splits. One faction goes to the moderates, the other goes to the extremists. And somebody very famously said that with the Surat split, the body of the Congress remained with the moderates, but the Atma, the spirit, went with the extremists. And the extremists had a conference of nationalists, and they called it, and it was held at Haripura. Now, Haripura is an area around Gopipura and Gale Mandi, these areas in Surat. So at the Haripura Ghanchi Wadi, if somebody is from Haripura or if somebody knows somebody there is a Ghanchi Sheri in Haripura and there is a Wadi. So at the Ghanchi Wadi in Haripura, the nationalist conference was held for the first time. Aurobindo Ghosh was the president, and they passed a resolution. And so Surat has been very important for the rise of extremist activities and revolutionary activities in the country. So what happened after the 1907 Surat session is remarkable. And who are the people? I mean, they formed Nationalist Association with Magandal Mehta, Manat Raiji, Jyotsnaben Shukla, and Dayarji Bhai Desai. Who is Dayarji Bhai Desai? Suna lag raha hai. Any idea?
Dayarji Bagh છે ખરો ને આપણે
it's Dayarji Bagh. So there is a Dayarji Bagh, there is a Dayarji Ashram, there is a Dayarji marriage hall today. So so that was Dayarji Desai, and he is considered the lion of Surat. So just as we had Lala Lajpat Rai in Punjab, who was called the lion of Punjab, in the same way the lion of Surat was Dayarji Desai. He was an extremist leader, a revolutionary, and also a philanthropist. So this is how the extremist activity started across the country. They were very strongly repressed by the government of that time. You must have seen so many of them died. They were imprisoned in Andamans in some of the most difficult situations, conditions. So that is how it happened. And now we move to the arrival of Gandhiji on the scene. Now Gandhiji, I feel, has been a very fortunate leader because he was at the right place at the right time. Just when you had a leadership vacuum because Gokhale is dead, Dadabhai Nauroji is dead, Lokmanya Tilak is ailing, Lala Lajpat Rai is dead, all the old leaders are dead. And then this young fellow comes from South Africa and he has a reputation because he has done some wonderful work in South Africa, and his reputation travels before he does. And soon after coming to India, he organizes two very spectacular agitations, one in Champaran and the other in Kheda. And also the Ahmedabad text mill owners, uh, textile mill workers agitation. So, but Gandhiji had a very peculiar style of working. If you see, there have been only four major movements in Gandhiji's career, political career. The first started with Champaran. Then in 1920, 1922, you had the non-cooperation movement. Then again in 1931-32, the civil disobedience movement. And in 1942, the Quit India movement. That's all. But between all these movements, you had at least a decade pass by. So what did Gandhiji do in that decade? He was spreading the ideas of nationalism, of his doctrine of Satya and Ahimsa, Satyagraha and Ahimsa, across the country. At the same time, many of his followers were engaged in social construction, women emancipation, and the upliftment of the Dalits and other underprivileged sections, and also the setting up of national universities, schools, uh, industries. So this is how it went about in those 10 years. But we are not talking about Gandhiji today because a lot has already been said about him. But we are talking about one of Gandhiji's lieutenants, which was Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. And we are now jumping from 1907 directly to 1928 to the Bardoli Satyagraha. Now, the Bardoli Satyagraha was first to be held in the year 1921-22 during the non-cooperation movement. But as we all know, because of the Chauri Chora incident, the entire movement had to be suspended. So the Bardoli Satyagraha now happens in the year 1927-28, because in 1926 there is a revenue settlement revision. So all the farmers, whatever revenue they are supposed to pay, after a period of 30 years, there happens a revision, and this happens in the year 1927 in Bardoli, in two talukas. One is Bardoli, the other is Choriasi. So it happens, and there are two officers. One is Jaikar, who is the deputy collector of the city, Surat, and the other fellow is Anderson, who is the settlement commissioner. Now, both these idiots, what they do is they prepare the entire revision circular without even visiting the villages, even without visiting the taluka headquarters. And I've had an experience of working with the government of India for around 2.5 years. So unfortunately, that entire breed of idiots still continues to exist. So there are many, there are a few that I've come across who do that. They just fish the old reports, look at that, and add a 10% revision and submit it. So that is what used to happen even back then. We had Jaikar and Anderson do the same thing. They just made some mental calculation and increased it. Jaikar increased the revenue by 25%, and this gentleman Anderson increased it by 29%, without even looking at the ground reality. And then the farmers of Bardoli, they rose in rebellion. And what kind of rebellion was it? It was a non-violent rebellion. So they said, we are not going to pay the increased tax, but hold on, we are not going to pay the tax which was there earlier also. We are going to pay no tax. Plus, what are we going to do? All the talatis resigned. So we are not going to work for the government anymore. And what did the government do in response? They confiscated all their lands, they confiscated their cattle, and they started auctioning them. But once they started auctioning them, nobody came to buy them. Such was the unity. Return it back to them. And the atmosphere was so vibrant then, and so much in favor of nationalism, that the British tried to break a few people and wean them away from the Satyagraha. The Banyas were harassed, then the Adivasis were harassed, some of the farmers were harassed. So if the father showed any interest to pay the tax and move away from the Satyagraha, the son would go on an indefinite fast against him. If the husband showed any interest to pay the tax, the wife would say, I'm not going to talk to you, and I'm not going to eat, and I'm not going to cook for you if you pay the tax. So that is how the atmosphere was at that time. And finally, the government had to give in, and an independent commission was set up, and they brought down the tax rates. and all the prisoners were released. The confiscated land was returned to them. Interesting. And one more point, because this was a 2-year long struggle, and in between you also had the monsoon come in, and you have to cultivate during the monsoon. So farmers went to their farms and started cultivating. The government would imprison the person who was cultivating, somebody else would take his place. And this cycle continued, and that has been the greatest strength of us Indians. It is our numbers, the sheer numbers in this country uh, have always, I mean, even if you start a campaign for opening bank accounts, India will be at the top because we have got numbers. If you talk about building toilets, I mean, unfortunately, the government did not build it for all these times, but for all these years, but if you have such a campaign, India is at the top. So in the same manner, it is the numerical strength, and the other strength that we have is that of resilience and tolerance. Our tolerance is very high. Any policy decision in any other country, take for example, demonetization for that example, or the emergency. Such policy decisions in any other country would have resulted in a civil war, or at least a violent unrest. But it is our tolerance, it is our faith in the system that helps us sustain any such exercise. So it is our resilience, it is our tolerance, and it is our numerical strength, and of course our civilizational greatness, which has sustained us so far. With this, I'll end it here. There was a little more that I wanted to say, but we have already overshot the time limit, and there is a small presentation of pictures that I want to show you. And since this talk was called Sardar Subhash, Salt and Splits, we have talked about Sardar, we have talked about salt, we have talked about splits, but we have not spoken about Subhash. So that I'll talk about when I show you the pictures. So Saloni, I'll just start sharing the screen.
No problem. No problem. You are able to, right, Paritosh?
Yeah. Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yes, I can see.
Okay. So here we have a British factory. As you can see, there are traders here, and then there is a protective wall. So this is what a factory would have looked like at that point of time. And this is the view of the Surat fort sometime in the 18th century. Oh, bada karu, I'll have to
do the full screen.
Better? I can't go any further. That's all. So this is what Surat would have looked like at that point of time. You can see the fort, you can see the castle, and the bastions, and all these ships that are anchoring at the fort. This gentleman is Nawab Nasiruddin. Nawab Nasiruddin was the Nawab of Sachin, and by default Surat, who was deposed after the Treaty of 1800, and Surat finally went into the hands of the British, and Wellesley was the Governor General at that point of time. This gentleman on the left, is Durgaram Mehta. Now, Durgaram Mehta started the Manav Dharma Sabha, and even before Narmad, he is considered to be the earliest writer of nationalistic literature in Gujarati. He started the Manav Dharma Sabha, and again a very interesting character, and immense contribution to Gujarati literature, to the independence of India, and the growth of Gujarati Asmita, or the sense of being a Gujarati. So Durgaram Mehta, but we have unfortunately forgotten about this gentleman. And to the right, you have Icharam Desai, another such writer. He started a weekly called the Swatantra. And in the Swatantra, he used to write articles which would today be considered seditious against the British government. So these two gentlemen, who are considered the pioneers of an intellectual consciousness and intellectual growth in Surat. This is the map that I think Saloni had also shared last time. So we are also looking at the areas which are today very easily recognizable. You've got Soni Falya, Gopipura, Sagrampura, Nanpura. So all these areas existed even back then. And when I was talking about the smaller movements that were happening in the 19th century, they were centered around all these areas. So Nanpura market would be closed, Gopipura would be closed, Bhagatara would be closed. People would assemble at the Chowk area. Chowk Bazaar would be closed. So these are some hotspots of the movements that happened in. This gentleman is Harilal Dhruv that I'd spoken about, who started the organization before the Congress and got all those demands met. And he was the first representative from Surat to the first session of the Congress that happened in 1885. These three gentlemen, you have Dadabhai Naoroji to the left. Who's in the center? An answer? Anyone, please. We have already spoken about him.
Could you give a clue?
He is a Parsi. Which you can make out from the hat that he's wearing.
Yeah, something beyond that.
Something we have already spoken about him, and poor thing was hit somewhere.
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's okay. That's Firoz Shah Mehta. And who is to the extreme right?
Oh, that's
Gopal Chandra Gokhale.
That's Gopal Krishna Gokhale, all right. So, and these two gentlemen, here you have Surendranath Banerjee to the left and Raj Bihari Ghosh to the right. This is what the French garden would have looked like. I got this from one of the research papers, and this is a very old painting. You can see the Tapi River and then the fort area. And what you see to the left of it, outside the city walls, that small patch, that is the French garden. So what is marked by A, that red bastion, that's the castle. Then you have the two concentric city walls. And to the left, to the south of the city walls, which is today the area around Athwa, that's the French garden. And this is how the venue had looked like, venue would have looked like. This is an actual picture from the 1907 Surat session. Beautiful Shamiana. Even today, if you go to Vanita Vishram ground, I mean, I love observing that the annual Janmashtami Mela that happens in Vanita Vishram ground. They come up with such wonderful, beautiful ideas for the facade. So even in 1907, we had a very good, very well decorated Shamiana. This was the venue for the session. And to the right, what you see is what remained of the venue after the Hula Balu that happened, and people started throwing chairs at each other. And this is an actual picture from the Conference of Nationalists that happened in Surat in 1907. Again, this happened in the Haripura Ghanchiwadi. To the extreme left, you have got Dada Saheb Khaparde. In the center, you have, can you identify the gentleman in the center who is seated, the one with the moustache, young fellow? Lokmanya Tilak is obviously talking. He's standing and he's delivering his address. But who is the guy?
Harilal Dhruv?
No, that's not Harilal. Harilal Dhruv is dead by now. That's Aurobindo Ghosh. Aurobindo Ghosh was the president of that session of Conference of Nationalists. And this is the picture of the extremist leaders who were attending the 1907 Congress session. Can you identify that Sardarji, the Sardar gentleman, the Sikh gentleman at the extreme left, in the center, seated? I would be very happy if somebody can identify that. No answer. That's Sardar Ajit Singh, Bhagat Singh's uncle.
It looked like I was going to say Bhagat Singh, but I was like, how can it be Bhagat Singh? What he was related.
And then you have seated next to Sardar Ajit Singh, there is Aurobindo Ghosh, then Lokmanya Tilak, and then seated at the bottom, I mean, in the front row. Then you've got to the left, you have got Dadasaheb Khaparade. And Dadasaheb Khaparade stayed back in Surat after the 1907 session to recruit more people for the extremist cause. And standing at the back, that gentleman from Maharashtra in that strange looking hat, that's Dr. Gunje. Now, Dr. Gunje was, he was a close confidant of Lokmanya Tilak. And Dr. Munje, because of his proximity to Lokmanya Tilak, also became a very important extremist leader. And we credit Lokmanya Tilak for having popularized Ganesh Chaturthi and Shivaji Jayanti in Maharashtra and central India. But actually, the groundwork was done largely by this gentleman. And after Lokmanya Tilak's death in 1920, Dr. Saheb left the Congress and he became a member of the Hindu Mahasabha till he passed on his the baton to Veer Savarkar. And while Baba Saheb Ambedkar was contemplating conversion to another religion, it was Dr. Saheb and Veer Savarkar who convinced him to pick an Indic religion. So he had options to pick Sikhism, he could have picked Jainism or Buddhism when he wanted to leave the fold of Hinduism, because basically they are all products of the same civilizational journey. So it was he who convinced him to pick either Sikhism or Buddhism, and eventually Baba Saheb picked Buddhism. And the person in the center with a muffler, he is Ramaswamy, he's a Tamil leader, and then that's Kumarji Desai from Gujarat in a turban. This is from the Bardoli Satyagraha. Gandhiji only attended the movement, became a part of it towards the end when there were news that Sardar Patel could be arrested. So somebody had to take over the reins. So Gandhiji went to Bardoli, and this is a picture from that time. This is Jugatram Dave to the left. Jugatram Dave was handling the publications and the PR during the Bardoli Satyagraha, because a lot of patrikas, pamphlets were being circulated during that period. And the person to the left is Tribhuvan Das Patel, who is credited for bringing the White Revolution to Gujarat. He was also part of the Bardoli Satyagraha. And now we come to the 1938 Haripura session. Another 5 minutes and then we wind it up. In 1938, the session was held in Haripura. Now, this is not a Haripura which is in the Surat city. This is a village near Bardoli. And the entire village was constructed to host some 2 lakh delegates of the Congress who were attending that session. And Vitthal Nagar was an area which was constructed specially to host all these people. And Subhash Chandra Bose was elected president of the Congress in that year. And that catapulted him to national consciousness. And the agenda of the Congress for the next year and a half was to be decided by Subhash Chandra Bose. But in 1939, the session was held in Tripuri, which is near Indore. And in that year, again, Subhash Chandra Bose was popularly elected the president. But on Gandhiji's insistence, another gentleman was made the president. And Subhash Chandra Bose resigned from the Congress in protest, started the Forward Bloc, briefly worked with the Forward Bloc, and its activities expanded. And then he left the country and joined the Azad Hind Fauj in Singapore. So Haripura session is also important because it was held in Surat, and because the direction of to the national movement that Subhash Chandra Bose gave was in favor of socialism. So till then, Gandhiji was basically was very conservative in his approach, and almost right wing in his economic policies as well as in his cultural leanings. But it was Subhash Chandra Bose who brought socialism to the thinking of the Congress, and he started the National Planning Committee, which later became the Planning Commission. And he also advocated support for the state people's movements, because there were, apart from the British territories, there were also a lot of princely states which wanted independence from their despotic rulers. So he advocated support from the Congress to these people. So these were some of the things which happened then. And this is a picture from the Haripura session. The President Subhash Chandra Bose in the center, Jawaharlal Nehru to his right, and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel also in the picture. A few more pictures from that Now, Gandhiji and Subhash Chandra Bose had a very interesting relationship. They were on opposite ends when it came to certain issues, but at the same time, they shared a father-son-like relationship. So please read more about the equation between Gandhiji and Subhash Chandra Bose after this lesson. Yes, sir, you will be surprised, and it will be enlightening. So this is there was a yatra from the Haripura bus station to Vitthal Nagar. So this is so you can identify a few people there. You've got Subhash Chandra Bose at the top. Next, then you have Sardar Patel, Sarojini Naidu, then Acharya Kripalani to Jawaharlal Nehru's left. So these are some leaders who were present there. And in the Faizpur session of 1937, Jawaharlal Nehru was the president. So the outgoing president is handing over the responsibility to the incoming president. So that's and this is a presidential portrait of Subhash Chandra Bose. Last slide, and here you have a set of paintings. Now, Gandhiji asked Nandalal Bose. Nandalal Bose is considered a pioneer as far as modern Indian painting is concerned. He belonged to the Bengal school of painting. So he was asked to design decorative panels to decorate the Shamiana that was set up at Haripura. And he made some 35 odd panels, and some of them have still been preserved, and they tour the world every now and then. So these are the Haripura panels, which were designed by Nandalal Bose, and to the left you have Nandalal Bose showing Gandhiji one of the panels at the venue. So with this we come to the end of today's talk. Thank you so much for bearing with me. And I loved talking to you people. If there are any questions, I would love to answer them to the best of my ability.
I had a question, Paritosh, regarding the picture you showed of the French garden. Which research paper do you get
Yeah,
it
but I'll
from?
just let you know. I think it's by Sarah Keller. But let me just give me a moment. It is by Sarah Keller. Surat: The First Steps of the French Adventure. You can find a two-page abstract on Google. If you Google it, you will find a two-page abstract of the entire study.
Okay, okay. We have a lot of research papers on Surat, which I'm recently discovering, and
Yeah,
that's really interesting. That so many universities across the world have studied this city.
right. Any other questions? Could you leave us with a few article links to direct us to the most authentic information? Chandni, I think as far as history is concerned, there isn't, I mean, authenticity is always questionable. So I suggest that you read across research papers and try to corroborate the information that you get from one with what you get from another. But if you go online, as far as modern Indian history is concerned, you will find a lot in the National Archives of India. Now, many of the archival papers have been now digitized, and there is a portal called Abhilekh Patal, so of the National Archives of India. So if you go to Abhilekh Patal, it will ask you to register on it, and once you register, you can access all the digitized papers, uh, which run into crores of pages of data. They can be accessed from your laptop, and then you can search the specific query terms that you want to insert, and then you can get all the archival material that deals with Surat. Now, a lot of literature has been written about our city in the medieval period, in the modern period also. But there are a few books that I would like to recommend. The first is Mirati Ahmadi. So Mirati Ahmadi was written sometime in the 16th century, 16th, 17th century. And I mean, it's a text which is written in Persian, which runs into many volumes. But at the same time, you will also find a small, concise edition, which was printed by the Baroda Gayakwad Oriental series. and that's in English, so you can go through that. I'll also be starting with that now, and maybe a few months down the line we can have a discussion on Mirathi Ahmadi, which talks about Surat under the Mughals and the sultans, the Gujarat sultans. And there is another book written by Narmad, poet Narmad, which is called Surat Muktasar Hakikat. Now, if you can get your hands on this, that would be wonderful. If you can read Gujarati, I suggest that you read it in the original Gujarati. And I think that's all. Plus, the corporation has come out with this book called Surat Sonani Murat, but it does not talk much about the modern history of the city. But there is an interesting chapter on the Sudhrai. The Sudhrai is the local self-governing body of Surat, and Surat was the first city to have its own municipal council. And then the next one was somewhere on the outskirts of Visakhapatnam. So read about the Sudhrai. That is also a very important development in Surat. So these are some of the sources that you can use. Just go to archive.org and search Surat. You will find a lot of travelogues which have been translated into English. I think you can find Barbosa's
Yeah, you can.
travelogue, and I think there is one by Thomas. What was that fellow's name that you had spoken about last time? So many travelogues.
Coryatia and Petridavel, Theveno, Tavernier.
Yeah, Taverniers, yes.
Paritosh, could you repeat Narmad, Kavi Narmad's book name
Yeah,
again?
it is Surat Muktasar Hakikat.
Okay.
There is a question about Virji Vora and Shivaji. Okay. I'm not sure if Virji Vora and Shivaji are related. The person who had paid off Shivaji was somebody by some other name. Virji Vora used to be a very important trader whose hundi is the it's a letter of credit. So whose hundi was a means of currency across the globe. So even if you went to Egypt, if you went to Ireland, you went to Brazil, Virji Vora's hundi would be accepted as a means of currency.
There is one question regarding Bhimrad Gam connected to the...
I did see that question, but I do not have information about that. I'll find out about it. How Bhimrad exactly is connected to the Dandi Yatra.
Pareshna, do you have what idea do you have? If you have any information, you can share with us.
Hello. Yeah, yeah. Actually, what I heard that actual जो दांडी march हुआ था, so salt picking was done by Mahatma at Bhimrad Gam only, and that is again they have highlighted, and probably in the archives of India, उसका photograph भी है, and around 30,000 people were there, and it was a huge gathering, and at that time I think Harilal and Ramlal ji दोनों साथ में भी थे. The story of Dandi is actually the story at Bhimrad Gam. That is what is people used to say, and there are not many evidences for this. So things are going on. Just find out, yeah.
It seems
and if at all we will move to Bhimrad, we may have actual वहाँ छोटा museum जैसा भी वो लोग बना रहे हैं. They are preparing all sort of museum, Gandhi Kutir, and they are interested in developing some sort of Gandhian activities.
Right.
So it must be the interesting one, yeah.
I'll read about this.
Sure. Yeah,
thank you so much.
Yeah, seeing you after a long time. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
I'll just add to this one. The picture that is taken is actually at Bhimrad. ऐसा कुछ है.
That's true.
They did go up to Dandi, but जो photo op हुआ था बकायदा, वो Bhimrad के आसपास हुआ था कहीं पे. Is what is a common story actually.
That's true.
So Saloni, thank you so much. I think we'll call it a wrap.
Yeah, we call it a wrap. Thank you, Paritosh, for such an enlightening session. I learned a lot. I didn't know anything about like pre-independence. Modern history is a very much new thing for me. So I read about it in 8th grade, but then I never touched it again. So it was very refreshing. So thank you for that, and we have a lot of other positive feedback on chat as well. Everyone enjoyed it. So
Thank you so much.
thank you.
And
I
we are
also
meeting again next month.
yes,
Tell them
yes.
about it.
Yeah. So Once Upon a Time in Surat is an ongoing series. So we plan to make it a monthly series of episodes. So last month I talked about 17th century Surat. Right now Paritosh enlightened us with 20th century Surat. Now in November we are going to have a talk with a professor based in US, Dr. Douglas E. Haynes. He has written a book called Rhetoric and Ritual in Colonial India, which is basically a research and a thesis kind. It's historical book, but very well researched paper thesis on Surat based on Surat's economical history in 18th century. So, and he agreed to bless us with a talk. So, and I'm really excited for that. And I hope that I would also see some of you there as well, because when it comes to me, 19th 18th 19th century Surat is still like, I'm not so sure about what happened. TK 17th century Surat was like really amazing, very cosmopolitan thing, but then we don't, it's a blank about, we know that the port got declined and we shifted, the importance shifted to Mumbai, but what was happening in Surat during that time? And how is it that Surat survived when eventually it collapsed as a port, so to say, but still it's a very thriving city even today. So how is it? So that has got a lot to do with the Surti culture, which is so old that we don't even realize it. So and a lot of other things that even I don't understand. But that's what we're going to understand in our next talk. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. We can end the meeting. Thank you, Paritosh and everyone.
Thanks, Paritosh. Thanks, Saloni. Bye.
Bye.